Hi, and welcome to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. I'm Dupe Witherick, alcohol free wellbeing and transformational coach, and the best selling author of A Cocktail of Clarity, How to Ditch Drinking, Embody a Joyful New Identity, and Thrive Alcohol Free. This podcast will show you that being alcohol-free is not what the traditional narrative says. And even though alcohol is so ingrained in our society that it is okay to give yourself permission to stop drinking if you want to. And you do not have to wait until you hit rock bottom. It is certainly not boring, and I believe ditching drinking is just the start to living an extraordinary life. By getting rid of this one thing, it allows the doors to open to endless possibilities and opportunities. Each week, we will have guests on who are at various stages of the alcohol-free journey, from those who are curious to those who have been alcohol-free for years. We will also have experts on talking about different topics relating to alcohol and beyond. Through these conversations, you will discover what it means to thrive alcohol-free. Enjoy. So welcome, Lindsey. Thanks for coming and being a guest on the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. How are you today?
I am great, and thank you so much for having me. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, me too. I can't wait. And before we start, congratulations on being 7 years alcohol free in June. I mean, that is incredible. That's just an amazing achievement. I'll be 5 in November, 5 years in November, which I can't believe, but I think 7 years is amazing. So maybe let's start for people who might not know you. Why don't you give a brief introduction and then we'll go from there.
I would love to introduce myself. And of course, what labels do we apply to ourselves is always the question. I am a psychologist and sophrologist, and I work with people on behavior change using data-driven metrics, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Amazing. And we're going to go into all of that. And I love the fact it's data-driven as well. So maybe before we go there, I always love to hear people's stories and what brings them to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. So I'd love to hear a bit about your alcohol journey before the 7 years, and then obviously how you got to the point where you were like, right, I'm stopping, and you're obviously 7 years in, and potentially what's happened since then as well to keep you on track. So I'd love to just leave it to you to give a bit of a précis on all of that.
You're very kind giving me the floor. Thank you. Yeah, 7 years without any alcohol. What a journey it's been. And of course, it's a very exciting place to live when you suddenly become conscious of everything and aware of what's going on in life and the choices that you can and can't make and the things you can and can't control. My journey is like some people where they sort of it creeps up on them. I'd always been quite a keen drinker from a young age. I grew up in British pub culture, went off to university and really thrived in an environment where drinking many pints of snakebite and black. It was the days of Mad Dog 2020. I'm showing my age now. Before that, I think the only thing you could really access was maybe cider and vodka. That was sort of that seemed to be the combination that happened as teenagers. But yeah, Mad Dog 2020, Snakebite and Black. And then we entered the world of Alcopop slightly later, if you remember when that happened. So they weren't my favorite, but that was how my drinking sort of went, and very enjoyable as a student. That's what students did. I don't know what they do now. In fact, I'm not sure. I want to know as the mother of teenage girls. But that was sort of part of the course. I wasn't an athlete. I wasn't a gym bro. I wasn't I was in that student culture. And I then went to work and became a wine drinker. But of course, it wasn't just one or two wines. It was working in the city. I worked in banking for a while. It was a pretty big party lifestyle in the centre of London. Some of you may identify with the remembering the T.M. Lewin's shirt shop and buying a shirt on the way to work in the morning because you hadn't been home at night. So I'm not saying that proudly, but I am just saying that if there is anybody that identifies with that behavior from their 20s and they're still doing it, maybe that's a sign that you are drinking a little bit too much. This was before the days of mobile phones, of course, so there's very little evidence, which I'm delighted about. And I became very clever at checking what money I might have had left in my purse in the morning, piecing back together the evenings I'd had out, checking receipts. I used to do that a lot. Where had I been? Why had I spent all the cash I had? What happened to those several £100s? And where had I been in that taxi? So that was, it was great fun. Had a brilliant time. I then went on to have two children, which was fine. You've suddenly got a great career which you built up. You worked extremely hard, and then you're at home. And I actually chose to stay at home, which was a great privilege and a wonderful opportunity to raise my two girls. But I then fell into mummy wine zone. So I'm sure, again, people who might identify with the Prosecco brunch, the late lunch, the mummy tea, which involved wine. And it just became a bit of a wine fest, really. I was more than happy to put my recycling box out confidently full of wine and to pretend I'd had a party. And it just went on like that for a number of years until I realised it wasn't going to get any better. And, one hangover runs into another. A Friday and a Saturday night runs into a Sunday lunch. Sunday lunch runs into Monday evening thinking, poof, could do with a drink. It's Monday. I mean, now it's Tuesday. Probably do with a drink on a Tuesday as well. Wednesday, halfway through the week. What's not to love about a Wednesday? Wednesday was the new Friday. And then Thursday, it's definitely nearly the weekend. Friday definitely is the weekend. Saturday is the weekend as well, and so is Sunday. So it went on like that. And I got to the point where I started thinking, this is really good. I'm going to moderate this drinking fun, and realized that didn't seem to work very well. So I tried some really good tricks. Anybody, again, if they identify with this, I'm going to remind you that this is not quite how you want to drink. So I started thinking, well, maybe I'll just drink spirits. Maybe I'll just drink champagne. Maybe I'll just drink lager. Maybe I'll just drink. This went on for a while. And I remember going to a party one night and thinking, I'll just take pre-mixed cans, the ones you can get in Marks and Spencer's. I'll just take pre-mixed cans of whatever it was I'd chosen to drink. That will work. I won't drink too much. Drank too much again. So then I thought, this is getting absolutely ridiculous. So I decided to stop. And that in itself was an interesting journey, because when you've been numbing yourself with any substance, whether it's alcohol, drugs, addictive exercise, pornography, whatever it is you're using, when you take it away, there's a whole big space there that was filled by something that you no longer have. So I had to unpick or learn to live in a very different way, which I've learned to do. Now, of course, that leads us into the work that I now do, and it's been an amazing journey. But that's sort of how it happened. Nothing, I don't think, particularly out of the ordinary. And then the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, it's funny when you mentioned the TM Lewin shots. I'd forgotten about those, it is amazing how it suddenly becomes this habit, doesn't it? I think that's the best way to describe it. It just becomes a bit of a habit, and because your tolerance grows as you grow, you don't think anything of it, and it just sort of gets to a point where you're like, yeah, okay. And then the moderation question happens, and you realize actually moderation is probably a bit harder than just stopping completely. And so I'm curious, well, obviously there was no road to Damascus rock bottom story, but what then made you think, well, I'm just going to stop, and how did you do it?
Well, when I realized I couldn't stop, that was, I think, the rock bottom of I have now lost control over this, because that went on for a long time. I kept thinking, I'll stop, I'll stop, I'll stop, and it never really happened. So in the end, I decided I would stop and actually use a 12-step program to do that. And I think as well, there was a huge spiritual awakening that happened when I realized that I was I was using alcohol as a crutch and a way to escape because I thought I was using it to have fun. But alcohol doesn't, in my opinion, um, bring you as much as it takes away. And when you're not having fun anymore, it becomes a more interesting story, because what does that actually mean if in your life if you remove this behavior that you've been, sort of engaging in for so long? Um, I think in terms of purpose for me, what is the point of my life? Who am I? Identity, and what does that really mean? They were the sort of uncovering or the unfolding parts of the journey. So stopping, becoming very present in what I'm doing, what's going on here. And I was very, very lucky to have a number of therapists and practitioners that I also engaged with, and very supportive other people I met in sobriety. And I was able to sort of have these experiences thinking, gosh, this is unpleasant, but it's just anger. Okay. And anger, like any emotion, comes to visit and then it leaves again. We don't become an emotion for the rest of our lives. And I was testing myself the other day. I received a text message that made me really cross. And I read it and I was like, oh, I'm so furious. I was like, oh, brilliant. Let's use this moment to learn what happens with fury. So I let myself, well, I got really cross because I was cross. And I was like getting crosser and crosser and crosser. And I was like, I wonder how long this is going to take to pass. And I thought, well, I'll march about and I'll do some physical movement and I'll sit in this anger. I won't respond. Because remember, between every action and reaction, there's a gap. And when you can use that gap for processing or awareness or consciousness, whatever you want to call it, you can change anything. Because we are, the product of our experiences and what we think. The reality is constructed. That's very deep, isn't it? But we construct an awful lot of it. So I watched this anger come, and I was getting crosser and crosser and crosser. And I was like, right, feeling it in my body, like, whoa. And then I was like, now it's gone. And then my mental state was able to take over. So it's physically in the body, I'm furious. And then the mental processing was not, I want to go completely bonkers at this person, but, oh, look, the emotion or the anger, the energetic coding of anger has gone. And now mentally, I'm like, now process what just happened. They sent a text message. They don't understand what they've actually said. It doesn't really matter to you. What will you do? And it was a really beautiful clarity, free of emotion. And when I started in the conversation with you, we've got the mental, we've got the physical, we've got the emotional, and then we've got the spiritual. And I'm like, this, when you learn to be in these different energetic places or different lives or different bodies, you have a full life. But when you live in your head, which is very, very unpredictable, a very odd processing place that carries lots and lots of historic neural pathways that you don't even know are happening, it's a bit uncomfortable. And then when you live in your body, you might be living from somewhere from anger, or you might be living from lust or addiction, or whatever's going on in the emotion. You're missing these other two places. So I think that's really how it unfolded for me. And I'm a very curious person. I've apparently been saying why, and why do they do that? Why do they do that since about the age of 5? That is why I've built the business I've built, because of course, why do we do what we do? And then when we unpick it, we use that conscious, subconscious, we use the nervous system as a way of understanding what's happening. And we use this emotional range, this granularity. What do we feel? Fine. Fine's not an emotion. How do we feel? Okay. Okay is not an emotion either. Keep going. I feel angry. Great. What's underneath it? Where is it in the body? How is that manifesting? And how do you actually want to feel? So we've got a way to navigate towards it. So it was the beginning of really something terribly exciting for me, but deeply, deeply uncomfortable. I will be very honest with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you make about emotions. I like to say that they're like waves. You can literally just sit in them and wait for them to wash over you, because they will wash over you and they do pass. But as you say, I think whereas it's easier to get angry, reach for a drink, because that's the automatic habit that you formed, being able to actually do what you've just described, which is sit in it, wait for it to pass, then rationally think, okay, so what's actually happened? And what was I trying to make it mean versus what's the reality of it? And being able to do that is just incredible. And I wonder if you could do that prior to stopping drinking?
No, I was totally numb. My default was, oh, I'm happy, have a drink. Oh, I'm sad, I'll have a drink. Oh, I'm angry, oh, I'll have a drink. Of course, you're living life at the same time, but and I avoided perhaps, the rock bottom conversation is always interesting because some people do end up in a rehab type situation and some people don't. Some people manage their recovery in the community, some don't. There are many shades and there are no rights and wrongs. But it is important for people to think, what is right for me? Is this behavior right for me? Is it serving me? Am I really enjoying this? Or has it just become the thing I'm using as a way of escaping? Or numbing or dumbing down. And of course, since then, we've got a much more we've got much more access to technology. We talked a lot about AI therapy. We talk a lot about people using social media to numb and distract themselves. So I think we've got even more addictions than we had in the beginning to choose from as ways to escape from ourselves. What a terrible shame, because you have everything you need and you probably have a lot more than you ever dreamt of. So why don't we try and make the most of it by living in it?
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. And I think with all of these things that people get addicted to, you're absolutely right. It's really, what's the feeling that I'm trying to create, or what's the feeling I'm trying to escape from? That's what you want. It isn't the substance. It isn't the social media. It isn't something that helps you to feel the way you want to feel. And I think a lot of people lose that, so they don't realize that that's what it is, so actually when they reach for that drink, the thought should be, well, what's the reason, what's the feeling I'm trying to create, or what's the feeling I'm trying to escape from? And if that's the feeling, what could I potentially do instead of just having a drink and numbing out? Because the other thing that I've learned since drinking is, we're not just numbing those negative emotions, we actually end up numbing the positive ones as well. And I don't know if you found that, but the just really being present, the joy, the noticing the little things in life that are actually really good, taking in, going for walks and taking in the nature around you. Just, it was a hazy fog. I think everyone is walking around in a bit of a grey state, a bit of a murk state, and you just don't even realize you're doing it, because that's just what you think life has to be. So your point of everything's inside of us, and actually it could be so much better than we think we could even imagine. It's having the courage to say, actually, is this serving me physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in any way? And if the answer is no to any of that, then take a break and see what happens, because you're probably not living the life that you could be living.
No, I don't think you are at all. But in that, unfortunately, it's a very, very noisy world that we live in. So when you do become aware of all of these things, like you say, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the five senses that come back online when you do stop drinking, it's a bit of a shock. It's a bit like, have you seen any of those dark room experience things they're doing in America now? You go into this like dark room for 5 days, so you're completely sealed in, and they put the food in through this hat. And basically you're just meeting with yourself and anything else that's out there, not physically, but in the mental and emotional space and the spiritual realm. It feels a bit like that. It's like somebody's ripped off the protective duvet of alcohol fog, and you've suddenly got nowhere to go, and you'd be like, you're half naked and you can hear and feel everything. You're like, this is really horrible and really noisy. And especially if you are suffering from any kind of neurodiversity or any sort of those additional or different processing methods, the world is a very busy place. And I think that's is certainly what I see in my own practice, is people just being very overwhelmed and having to find a way to turn that off. And that's where these addictive behaviors, I think, become, they escalate so quickly. Because without that, how do you build a life which allows calm, quiet, present, peaceful, purposeful joy? When you are being sold to 24/7 You know, and even in your sleep, I'm, you know, thinking, shall I buy the pair of shoes, or the new, I'm massively into biking. Shall I buy this new bike? You know, no, you've already got one bike or two or three. You know, but we are obviously designed to be consuming something, and the world thinks that we should be consuming consumer stuff. And well, we shouldn't. We should be consuming love, joy, peace, patience, and kindness. They're the fruits of what we really want. But you mentioned earlier, before we started talking about this loneliness, this easy lonely world we live in, and I think it's very hard for people, very, very difficult.
Yeah, because so many people are surrounded by family, friends, but still feel incredibly lonely. It still don't feel like they have that connection. And I think as humans, you know, connection, growth, and feeling alive are the key things really for us, aren't they? That's what we want. And I wonder whether I know, I mean, I've had clients who have been lonely, and you can tell that that's why they have struggled so much to stop drinking, even though they've desperately wanted to. And so I've worked with them, but just working through that loneliness, of that loneliness is really hard for a lot of people, because it's how do you even begin? And then I think when you say I'm going to take alcohol out, well, the loneliness is 10 times worse, isn't it? Unless you actually make an effort and go out and find community. But the joy is, I mean, 7 years ago, I'm not sure what it was like, but 4.5, 5 years ago when I stopped drinking, again, there wasn't really that much around. There were few things, but now it feels like there's so many people talking about this. There's so many people out there that you could connect with, so many communities. And it's really, I know it's always a step to put yourself out there, but that's always a good start. So for the person who's listening, who's maybe thinking, well, I am feeling a bit lonely, you know, go and find a community, go and find some like-minded people, start a new hobby. I was just at the Mind Body Spirit Festival, speaking in London Olympia about finding your passion in sobriety, and it's so incredible how we forget that as children we could run around, we could laugh, we could have fun. We didn't need a substance. We would just do it. You know, we were very much in our own sort of energy and just like loving life, and you know, quite happy to be silly and to try new things and to run around and to, you know, swim and jump and dance and sing and whatever. And I always say, why don't you go back to when you were a child, a teenager? What did you love to do? And then start doing it again. Join the choir, you know, start dancing, join a Zumba class, or, you know, go and learn an instrument, learn a language, join a group of people that are like-minded, and find something that's going to start to light you up and get you out of yourself. Because I think on one hand, I absolutely believe everything's inside of us, and we need to look inwards, and we need to know what we truly want. And obviously, that's what we both work with people on. But also, on the other hand, it's also being surrounded by like-minded people, because the five people you surround yourself with, you become. And so, if people around you are, you know, drinking and just not really thinking about passions or thinking about doing anything other than what they've always done, you're going to end up being stuck. So there's so much for people to grasp and get a hold of, and realize that they're not missing anything by trying to do something different. It's a huge awakening, isn't it? And you were talking a bit about awakening and spiritual awakening. So I'd love to talk a bit more about what you do now, and where you are, because life's changed a lot for you, hasn't it, in the past 7 years?
It's changed enormously, and I was very fortunate a number of years ago to come across this method called Sophrology. It's a method that's very widely used in parts of Europe, France, Spain, and Switzerland specifically. And it's a practice that involves meditation, visualization, breathwork, and gentle body movement. It was designed in the 1950s by a Spanish neuropsychiatrist who was giving people electroshock therapy for mental illness. And he went all over the world in his lifetime and assembled a method that brings the best of the East and the West together. And I am very, very fortunate to be trained in delivering this method under the work that I do, which is called the Emotional wealth creation method. And it's a very, very special way of accessing both the inner space and connecting to something greater than you, but also becoming much more grounded in where we are right here, right now. So it's a method that has been proven and tested. It has been around forever. The documentation around it is fantastic, but it's mainly been taught in French and in Spanish. And when I use this practice with clients, we go on a journey of self-discovery where people begin to find a sense of purpose and passion, like you described, that they didn't even know was there because they didn't know how to get there. And of course, we have to get to many of these places by going inwards. And we're sort of trained a little bit to go outwards. Let's look for the club, the community, the tribe, the activity. And when we actually pause and we stop and we start becoming very aware of our body physically, our mental processing, our emotions, and then we also spend a lot of time in sophrology asking people how they want to feel. Because of course, when you say to people, how do you want to feel? And listeners can test themselves right now. What three emotions would you like to feel today? Now, I think you and I are probably pretty well trained at off the bat. This is what I want to feel. But a lot of people say to me, I don't know, Lindsey. I know how I don't want to feel, and I don't want to feel like this. I'm like, Jill, the great news is you don't have to, because your emotions are being created by you. You're not being made to feel guilty. You're allowing yourself to feel guilty. And that in itself is a very nuanced conversation that requires somebody to really help you walk through that process. Like, how do I know how to do that? Well, the first and most important thing is we have to stop, because you can't park a car driving at 100 miles an hour. You can't change direction if you're running full speed ahead. You have got to slow down and become present. And I also spend a lot of time doing sort of people's work with people on their inner sense of self, inner child, getting in right relationship with themselves. Because what happens is we go out into the world to look for things in relationships, which are actually things we need to give ourselves. And I felt that very strongly before we started talking today, that there really is a message here about what we're looking for in others is often what we're not giving to ourselves. And that really has to be our starting point.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. I think we are projecting everywhere we go. And so I do a lot of work in human design, and that's all. It's a self-awareness deconditioning tool, which really helps you to really understand yourself better, how best to use your energy, how to make aligned decisions, how to sort of move through the world with less resistance and more ease. And it also highlights what your gifts are, but also then when you're living in your shadows, so you're not actually living in the way that you could be living because you sort of you're in the wrong environment, or you're in the wrong, you're not seeing things in the way that you could be seeing them. You're not really noticing that you have these amazing gifts. What you're actually doing is living in the fear, or living in the numbing, or living in the victim mentality. And so how do you then understand, when you're actually living in the right way, and how do you get out of those shadows? Because I think a lot of people don't even appreciate that they are living in this way. And again, it's the going inwards, but it's the understanding of how you could potentially be versus how you are being. And as you say, we have a choice, don't we? We can say, I don't need to feel guilty, I'm being made to feel guilty. I mean, that's a really good point, isn't it? It's who's making you. That's the question. Who's making you feel guilty? And we do have a lot of agency in terms of how we can manage ourselves and manage our emotions. And emotions are really energy emotion. So they're just really telling you what's not quite right. They're warning you, they're giving you signs. And I think a lot of people, so one of the parts of human design that I love is that a lot of people are living in fears. They have various fears that they have. And I'm not going to go into it in detail, but in the splenic center, which is one of the centers, there are 9 centers. In the splenic center, the shadow of all the strengths in there are fears. So the fear of the unknown, the fear of the past repeating itself, the fear of responsibility, the fear of, people have got all these different fears that they're they're potentially living into, and believing that that's reality. And so I think everything you're doing in terms of helping people just be conscious and to go inwards and to really know what's what and what they want, and start to embody that and believe that they can actually have that agency in themselves, and everyone around them that they're seeing or they're hearing from and they're feeling a certain way is just, they're just signs, they're projecting. They're basically saying, okay, this is what I think the world is, because we all have our model of reality, don't we? We all have our way of thinking, and we all make things mean things that aren't necessarily the case. And so I think all of this work is so important for people to just start to unwind and embrace exactly who they are and how they work.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I would also urge any listeners to really be comforted by the fact that when they get to work with a coach or a therapist supporting them in this journey, is that we remind people that people around them react sometimes to the way that they're changing. And you'll know this yourself. Like you said, those 5 people around you, if they are also drinking heavily and you suddenly decide that you're going to stop, it's not that those people are being unkind to you, but they simply suddenly feel this change and it's very threatening to them. So then they can become incredibly challenging. And you will have heard many people say, oh, I thought people would be really happy for me when I stopped. Some people are. But don't you, that many, many people will be very confrontational with you when you make a change.
Yeah. Ultimately you're holding up a mirror to them, aren't you? And you're making them sort of, and as I said, we're just constantly projecting and reflecting others. And so we're, when you say something like I'm no longer drinking, I always think the people that ask the most questions and make the most big deal about it are generally the ones that know they have to do something as well, but they daren't. And so it's being brave enough to just say, well, this is a non-negotiable for me, this is what I'm doing, it's nothing to do with you, and cracking on with it, and then finding your people that are going to support you and are going to come on this journey with you, instead of the people that are naysayers or making your life difficult, right? So you don't need that.
Easier said than done. But I do think that's
Always.
when you can dig into sober communities or activities where alcohol
Mm.
is involved, it's super helpful. And I was laughing when you were talking about play. I was out on my road bike earlier this morning and I was racing my friend. So we're messing around. Come on, I'll race you. And then we were, taking each other. And, when you engage in playful activity, a Zumba class, I mean, I can't dance for toffee, but when I have been to Zumba with my mum, it's the funniest thing I've ever done because I think, no one's looking at me. Everyone's like, oh, what will people think? No one cares because they're too busy thinking about themselves. No one's looking,
Mm.
I promise.
Exactly. We get so caught up in that, don't we? And again, that's the reason why I think a lot of people stay stuck,
Yeah,
to stay on the journey of fitting in, because they worry so much about what people think. And to your point, people don't care. People aren't thinking about you as much as you like to think they are. People, you might be questioned a little bit, but as soon as you turn the conversation back to them, they've forgotten everything you said. They're not bothered. So um, we talk, the regrets of the dying, the book from the hospice nurse who obviously spoke to so many patients. And I think people just get to the end, you can potentially get to the end of your life and just think, why did I not take those chances? Why did I not do what I wanted to do? Why did I live someone else's life? Just because of what people thought or what I perceived people were thinking. Let's stop that. Let's not do that. Let's sort of make the decision now and say, actually, I no longer want to do this, because the likelihood is in 30, 40, 50 years time, those people aren't even going to be around. Those people, you probably won't be talking to those people, but your life could be completely different.
absolutely. And you talked a little bit about fear earlier as well. And I think the fear in us is huge. And that fear, really, that evolutionary fear that we're going to be kicked out of the tribe for not conforming, is the thing that makes us think, oh, everyone else is doing it, so I must do it too. Fear, of course, is very much what drives the nervous system and this fight or flight. And I'm a huge fan of really making sure that we're checking in on that nervous system state. And I mentioned to you using data, but also just becoming aware of the fact that, oh, I am in this fear response place, and oh, no, I'm not. That changes everything. It really does.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that, because you're a huge advocate of wearables and really monitoring your nervous system, regulation and and I suppose the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. But I'd love to hear your perspective on wearables and why they're such a good thing and how much data you can get from them nowadays. They've come on a long way, haven't they?
Oh, it's absolutely terrifying, really. And if you are wearing Aura, Whoop, or using your Garmin properly, I do urge you to have a look at your heart rate variability, because this data that's often hidden under a dashboard or it's hidden under an algorithm is absolutely key to affecting behavior change and living it feels purposeful and fulfilling. I am a big advocate of using the Whoop band specifically for relapse prevention, and I wear one. My family wears them. My father-in-law and my dad wear them as well, because it means that they actually do way more exercise, because I'm often in the app saying, oh, I saw you only had a strain score of 3 today, hadn't had the dog walked yet, and off they go. The same works for people that are using drugs or alcohol or exercise, because you can see very clearly when people are indulging or over pushing themselves. And you can go into that data and you can see, okay, my strain score, I've moved too much, I haven't moved enough. My heart rate variability, I'm in fight or flight and not in rest and digest. And of course, when you put alcohol into your body senses that this is a toxin, it's a poison. So your body begins to work very hard to eliminate it. Therefore, your heart rate variability, that is the gaps between your heartbeat, become much, much lower, much smaller. You have a much smaller number, because your body's really processing. So you could be an athlete, you could have a resting heart rate of under 150, which signals that you're super, super fit. But you could then have an HRV that's very, very low, because you are perhaps over stretching. You might be using other substances. You might be in fight or flight all the time, not necessarily because of alcohol, but stressors, confrontation, conflict, anything that's threatening your safety, really, physically, mentally, or emotionally, will drive that HRV figure down. And it's a great way to get compliance. And it's a great way for accountability and comfort, that I go into work with clients and I say, look, I'm watching your data. And what's also very interesting in that data is you can see different profiles. So when you're watching what's going on normally, and then you see a big shift in heart rate variability and HRV, you can see whether it's alcohol, you can see whether it might be drug use. The profiling on cocaine is very different from the profiling on things like ketamine and marijuana. You begin to sort of be able to ask those questions. Hey, what happened? How are you feeling? No judgment. But, we were talking about you feeling better or doing things differently. And you can also see if the strain score is very low. You haven't moved for a week. What's going on? How are you feeling? You can go into that stress score. Why is it peaking at 11 o'clock at night? Because, you shouldn't be running around at 11 o'clock at night. What's going on? Well, there might be confrontation in the home. There might be conflict, noisy neighbors. There's all sorts of things. It's a great tool for really getting to the root cause of what's going on, and then being able to support a client through their journey using data-driven behavior change. So I cannot recommend it enough. The data is there in those wearables. It is very, very helpful to have a coach who knows what they're talking about, leading you through that, just so you get an understanding of what's going on. And then, of course, when somebody else is watching it, it also helps. It creates a really nice sense of security that somebody's looking out for you and taking you on the journey that they've been on themselves. So yeah, highly, highly recommend it. And if anybody wants to talk about Whoop or Aura, I could go on about it all day.
And you specifically said the Whoop, so versus the Aura, maybe what's the difference that you recommend Whoop versus Aura, for example?
There's actually a significant pricing difference currently. The Whoop is a more cost-effective device. It stays on and the battery pack slides on and slides off, so you don't take it off. I keep mine on constantly, occasionally give it a little wash, but I wear it all the time, so the compliance is far better. Lots of people like the Aura Ring because it looks pretty, but you do have to take it off to charge it. And of course, if you are into high rocks, CrossFit, or any of those other crazy activities, you might be removing it for some of those. The Whoop also sits in apparel, so it goes on a bicep band, a bra strap, a boxer short. So it's a bit, in my opinion, more versatile. It's less of a fashion statement, although you can change the straps into all different colors. But yes, I do think it's a very, very good way using biometric health data to really begin to step into that longevity piece and behavior change. And ultimately, it's great to have tests done outside, but you've got data there that's already in you that tells you an awful lot before you start spending money on various other gadgets and gizmos. Let's see what the data actually says and what you can do about it. And sleep, sleep, sleep. You know how tired you get when you stop drinking. Oof.
Gosh, yeah. Sleep is so important though. And it's amazing because there are all these rumors when, well, yeah, we were brainwashed to think that alcohol helped us sleep, but it does the complete opposite.
Might help you go to
So
sleep.
yeah,
The
yeah,
quality of
exactly.
sleep, and you see it straight away. The quality of a night's sleep with alcohol is not the same as the quality of a night's sleep without alcohol. And yes, and as soon as you see that data, you begin to think, what am I doing? And of course, we know that not only alcohol is bad for our health, but poor sleep contributes very rapidly to any inflammatory diseases, dementia, and cardiac problems. So, sleep, sleep, sleep.
Mm,
But of course,
absolutely.
people who are very depressed and sleeping all the time, there's another conversation to be had there, of course.
Mm. Yeah, I think we could talk about sleep on a completely different episode because there's so much to talk about when it comes to sleep. But I think that's the starting point with everything, isn't it? Even, exercise is better. Everything's better when you get decent sleep and you can monitor that in a way. What other things would you say? You talked about the heart rate variability. What would you say are the other maybe one or two things that are worth people really honing in on if they decide to go and, or if they've got a wearable, if they're going to decide to invest in a Whoop or something like that? What would you
Something
suggest would be the other things?
I always point my clients towards respiratory rate because
Mm-hmm.
if you're breathing like a dog, your nervous system is really in fight or flight. So I really spend a lot of time talking to people about slow breathing and looking at your respiratory rate. And if you are wearing a wearable right now, have a little look and see if it's under 16, because you really do want to be sitting slightly lower than that. Even if you're exercising a lot, the devices are clever enough to take an average and present you with a baseline. Slow, deep, calm breathing to give yourself the space to think, to feel, and not react. It's the best biohack there is. And of course, when you breathe more slowly, guess what? Your heart rate goes down. Guess what happens when your heart rate goes down? You begin to feel better, and then you move in to rest and digest, and your body begins to process everything better. So, bloating becomes reduced. Your digestive tract begins to be more nourished. Your brain is able to switch gears and start making more connections. Everything begins to work better when you are in parasympathetic or rest and digest. So slow your breathing, slow your heart rate, and just be still.
Mm. Yeah. And it always makes me laugh because we have all these things, breathing, just breathe, right? So, but we don't use it, do we? We just don't even, a lot of people don't even know that they have that in them to really just calm them down. And breath work is just so important, and it doesn't take long to just get back to that parasympathetic base. So breathe today, breathe.
And keep breathing, please, because you come into the world on your first inhale and you go out on your last exhale. So there we go. They're the markers, the alpha and the omega of your earthly life. It's quite important, but of course we can't bottle it and sell it. So it's maybe not got the most commercial return.
It's true, very true. So, gosh, this has been an amazing. I've loved our conversation, Lindsay. Is there anything else you want to that we might not have talked about that you want to touch on?
I'm incredibly passionate about people stepping into who they're meant to be. And as I said in the beginning of the conversation, I think we already have everything we need, and probably we have more than we ever dreamt of. but we don't step into that fully. And any practice, whether you want to engage with me as a sophrologist, whether somebody wants to come and work with you, in exploring human design, I cannot urge people enough to look at your bank statement and look at the amount of money you've spent on external validation compared to the amount of money you spend on the inner work. And that's not going to the gym, that's outside work. The inner work, that inner development, that sense of self, we don't seem to spend any money, time, or effort on it. And I don't know how we've got to this point. And the longevity movement is fascinating to me. Biohacking, I've got a workbook that's got the word biohacking on the title in Amazon. It's a great word. But like you say, the only biohack you need is breathing and sleeping. So let's try and do that properly, shall we, people? And get somebody to help you. If anybody wants to have a call with me, I offer a complimentary consultation. I would really ask anybody who's listening, thinking, I might go and work with a coach, to get in touch with you, because you do need some guidance here, because it's a very noisy world we live in. But this isn't forever. It's, you train people to do what they do, and it changes their lives. It's very exciting.
Really exciting, really exciting. Well said. And so I always end the podcast with my favorite question. What does thriving alcohol-free mean to you, Lindsey?
Oh, thriving means being aliving, I think. And that's obviously not a word. But I think if you are using alcohol or other substances, you're actually living half dead. And I don't know about you, but I want to live fully alive and present in this world and the next. And that for me is truly thriving in the existence that we've been given. So yeah, I'd encourage anybody just to think about that, thrive and be alive, or just be a bit half dead. It's not really fun. And you might have just got yourself there by accident, and there's no judgment. But here we are to help you come out of that.
Yeah, great answer. I love that. Yeah. It sounds melodramatic, doesn't it? But actually, it's the truth.
And also this whole fear of death. A lot of I need to do this because I don't want to die, and I must do this biohacking thing, and I'm really worried about death and legacy, and like, okay, that's great. We're all dying. There's nothing to do about it. Let's live like full throttle living in today, not full throttle living on my 1 week trip to Ibiza. Let's live fully in the present. You're like, really, I love this conversation. You and I connected like through different contact points as well. How exciting to see what the universe does. There are no coincidences in life. And when we become really aware of that, and how special this is, and how so much is already predetermined for us and predestined, it's really, it's exciting. So let's be aware and conscious and not half dead and drunk, because that's just rubbish.
Couldn't have said it better. Well, thank you for being such a wonderful guest. How can people get in touch with you, Lindsey?
So I would love to speak to anybody, and my website is a good place to start, which is lindseyfrances.co.uk, Lindsey with an E, Frances with an E. My own podcast, Rich Simple Human. You'll find me on Instagram, and you will definitely find me hanging out on LinkedIn, which I think is a great fun place at the moment. A little controversial at times, I find, but you can find me under Lindsey Frances on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the conversation, and I look forward to continuing the conversation and hearing how you get on. And who knows, we might have you back and we can talk about something else, sleep or something else, another time. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you so much for listening to the Thrive Alcohol Free podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe so you get alerted every time I drop a new episode. I'd love it if you could rate, review, and share this episode. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Thrive Alcohol Free and follow me for daily tips. If you would like to work with me, I offer one-to-one coaching sessions and have my signature Thrive Alcohol Free Society group coaching program. If you're not yet ready for coaching, I also have a self-paced online course, which is a companion to my book, A Cocktail of Clarity. All the links are in the show notes. I will see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful week. Take care.